There is a specific kind of peace that exists only when you are lying on your back on a cold concrete floor, staring up at the rusted underbelly of a 1969 Mustang Fastback. It's a peace made of grease, determination, and the distinct lack of other human beings. I had a wrench in one hand, a smudge of 10W30 on my forehead, and for the first time in 6 months, the transmission bolt was actually turning. Then, I heard the sound. Click, clack, click, clack. It wasn't the rhythmic ticking of a cooling engine. It was the aggressive staccato rhythm of sensible heels on paved asphalt. The sound stopped right at the edge of my driveway. I froze. Maybe if I didn't move, the predator would lose interest. "Mr. Miller? I know you're under there. I can see your boots. They are frankly quite unsightly." I closed my eyes and exhaled a breath that was 90% frustration and 10% exhaust fumes. I knew that voice. It was a voice that could curdle fresh milk from 50 paces. It was Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Patricia Gable was the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. She was a woman who treated the neighborhood bylaws not as a set of rules, but as a sacred text she had been ordained to enforce with holy fire. She was 5'0" of pure, condensed bureaucratic malice wrapped in a beige cardigan. I slid out from under the Mustang, dragging myself onto the mechanic's creeper. I sat up, wiping my hands on a rag that was already dirtier than the floor. "Good morning, Patricia. To what do I owe the pleasure? Did my grass grow a millimeter while I was asleep?" She didn't smile. Mrs. Gable never smiled. She only bared her teeth in a way that simulated politeness. She was holding her clipboard like a shield. "Don't be facetious, Mr. Miller. We are here to discuss the industrial situation." She waved a hand vaguely at my open garage. It was a standard 2-car garage. Inside, there was a tool chest, a workbench, an engine hoist, and my Mustang. To me, it looked like heaven. To her, apparently, it looked like a zoning violation. Industrial situation? I stood up, cracking my back. "It's a garage, Patricia. I park cars in it. Sometimes I fix them." "Precisely," she said, unclipping a pen. She wrote something down with a flourish. "We have received multiple complaints regarding the nature of your activities here. The noise of air tools, the smell of solvents, the unsightly appearance of dismembered vehicles visible from the street. It creates a working-class atmosphere that is inconsistent with the aesthetic of Whispering Pines." I blinked. Working-class atmosphere? "Patricia, I'm an engineer. This is my hobby. I'm restoring a classic. It's American history." "It's a nuisance," she corrected. "And more importantly, it is a violation of Article 4, Section 2 of the Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. No owner shall operate a commercial business, trade, or profession of any kind from their residential unit or garage which involves the noticeable presence of clientele, inventory, or industrial equipment." "Commercial business?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Patricia, look at this car. It has no wheels. The engine is on a stand. I have been working on this specific car for 3 years. If this is a business, I am the worst businessman in the history of capitalism. I have 0 customers, and my profit margin is negative $20,000. She didn't blink. She reached into her bag and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. The wax seal of the HOA was missing, but the weight of the paper screamed legal threat. "The board has determined that the scale of your equipment, that hoist, those large red cabinets, constitutes a professional automotive repair shop. Whether you are successful at it is irrelevant. You are operating an unauthorized mechanic shop. This is a cease and desist order." She thrust the envelope toward me. I didn't take it. My hands were greasy. She hesitated, looking at the oil on my fingers with genuine horror, then gingerly placed the envelope on the hood of my daily driver. A pristine F-150 that I also wasn't allowed to park on the street overnight. You have 24 hours to remove the industrial equipment and cease all mechanical work, she said, turning on her heel. After that, the fines begin. Have a blessed day, Mr. Miller. She walked away. Click, clack, click, clack. I stood there for a long time, staring at the envelope. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and I had the sudden, overwhelming urge to buy a drum set. I opened the envelope. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just a warning. It was a formal citation. They had categorized my snap-on tool chest, my pride and joy, as industrial-grade signage because it was red and had a logo. They had categorized the Mustang as scrap inventory. I went inside, washed, my hands with the gritty orange soap that smells like pumice and regret, and called the number at the bottom of the letter. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. It was Saturday. The rest of the weekend was a wash. I couldn't work on the car because every time I picked up a wrench, I felt like I was committing a felony. Sunday night, I sat at my kitchen table and drafted a reasonable, logical email to the board. I explained that I was not a mechanic. I explained that owning tools does not make one a business, just like owning a knife doesn't make one a chef. I attached photos of the car. I even offered to keep the garage door closed, even though it was July and 90 degrees inside. Monday came. No reply. Tuesday. No reply. Wednesday. I came home from my actual job, sitting in a cubicle designing HVAC systems, to find a certified letter taped to my front door. Notice of violation. Date: July 14th, 2026. Offense: continued operation of unauthorized commercial automotive. Repair facility. Fine: $500. Note: fines will accrue daily until the violation is remedied. $500. I stared at the paper. My blood pressure spiked so hard I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. This wasn't a fine, it was a mortgage payment. I marched over to Mrs. Gable's house, 3 doors down. It was a pristine white colonial with a lawn that looked like it had been manicured with nail scissors. I rang the bell. She opened the door, wearing an apron. The smell of baking cookies wafted out, which felt like a personal insult. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I assume you're here to pay the fine?" "I'm here to tell you this is insane," I said, holding up the paper. $500? For what? I haven't even touched the car since you came over." "The equipment is still there," she said simply. "The garage door was open this morning when you left for work. The shop is clearly open for business. The board voted last night. We are taking a hard line on commercial zoning violations to protect property values." "I demand a hearing," I said. "I want to speak to the board, face to face." "The next open meeting is in 2 weeks," she said, reaching for the door handle. "But you can submit an appeal in writing. There is a $50 processing fee." "I'll see you in 2 weeks," I snapped. "And stop calling it a shop?" I walked back home, seething. 2 weeks. That would be $7,000 in fines if they actually enforced the daily rate. I needed a plan. I needed a lawyer. But mostly, I needed a drink. The next 2 weeks were a blur of petty harassment. I'd come home to find Mrs. Gable standing on the sidewalk with a tape measure, measuring how far my truck stuck out of the driveway. I received another fine for improper storage of hazardous materials because I had a bottle of Windex on a shelf visible from the street. By the time the meeting rolled around, I had $8,500 in fines pending. The meeting was held in the community center basement. It smelled like floor wax and stale coffee. The board sat at a long plastic table. Mrs. Gable in the center, Mr. Henderson, a man who had been asleep since 1998, to her left, and Janice, a woman who communicated exclusively through sighs, to her right. I stood at the podium. I had prepared a PowerPoint. I had receipts. I had character references stating I was just a nerd who liked cars. "State your case," Gable said, not looking up from her notes. "This is absurd," I started, trying to keep my voice level. "I am not running a business. I have no customers. I have no revenue. The bylaws state that a commercial enterprise requires commerce. I am losing money. Therefore, I am exempt." Mr. Henderson woke up. "But you have the big red box, like at the Jiffy Lube." "That is a tool chest, Mr. Henderson. It holds tools." "It looks commercial," Janice sighed. "It's very red. The color of my storage is not a zoning violation." I slammed my hand on the podium. "You are fining me $500 a day because you don't like my hobby. This is harassment." Mrs. Gable finally looked up. Her eyes were cold, hard flints. "Mr. Miller, we have a standard to maintain. When people drive through Whispering Pines, they expect elegance. They do not expect to see a grown man covered in grease, wrestling with scrap metal. It lowers the tone. The fines stand. If you do not pay within 30 days, we will place a lien on your property. Next item." "You can't be serious," I stammered. "Next item," she barked, slamming a gavel she had absolutely no legal right to use. I walked out of that basement shaking. I wasn't just angry anymore. Anger is hot. It burns out. This was something colder. This was hatred. They wanted to take my house. They wanted to take my hobby. They wanted to bankrupt me because my tools' chest was red. I got into my truck and sat in the dark parking lot. I needed to destroy them. But I couldn't do it with violence, and I couldn't do it with logic. I had to do it with their own weapon. I needed the book. I spent the next 48 hours doing two things: drinking cheap domestic beer and reading the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of Whispering Pines Phase 2. It was a document written by the devil and edited by a bored paralegal. It was 300 pages of font size 8 misery. I read about fence heights. I read about acceptable shades of beige. There were 14. I read about the prohibition of cloven-hoofed animals. Goodbye, dream of a pet goat. And then, at 3:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, my eyes bleary and my soul weary, I found it. Article 12, Section C, Paragraph 4. Commercial restrictions set forth in Article 4 shall not apply to registered educational activities, religious gatherings, or community outreach programs designated as non-profit, provided said activities serve to enrich the cultural or vocational standing of the community. I read it again, then a third time. Vocational standing. Educational activities. They had put this in, presumably, so Mrs. Gable could host her Bible study and Tupperware nights without getting zoning violations, or so the vice president could run his piano tutoring hustle. It was a carve-out for the in-crowd. A slow, wicked smile spread across my face. I didn't have a mechanic's shop. Oh no, that would be illegal. I picked up my phone and texted Mike. "You awake? I need you to file some paperwork. It's an emergency. It involves tax law and spite." Mike replied instantly. "I'm up. Is there money or beer involved?" "Both." Mike wasn't technically a lawyer anymore. He had been disbarred for an incident involving a jet ski and a misunderstanding of maritime law, but he was currently a high-powered paralegal who knew more about filing loopholes than anyone I knew. We met the next morning at a diner that served eggs specifically designed to cure hangovers. "So," Mike said, dousing his hash browns in hot sauce. "Let me get this straight. You want to register your garage as a school?" "Not just a school," I said, sliding the highlighted bylaws across the sticky table. "A non-profit vocational training center. A 501c3 charity dedicated to teaching at-risk youth the valuable trade of automotive repair." Mike chewed slowly, reading the text. He whistled. "That is incredibly stupid. I love it. But Jack, you can't just say it's a school. You have to actually be a school. You need a curriculum. You need safety protocols. You need students." "I'll get students," I said, waving a hand. "There's a community center downtown. Plenty of kids need something to do. But first, I need the structure. I need to make it untouchable." "Okay." Mike pulled out a napkin and a pen. "Register the entity. The Jack Miller School for Wayward Boys?" "No," I said. "It needs to sound official. Noble. How about the Lugnut Learning Center for At-Risk Youth?" Mike groaned. "That's terrible. Let's go with the Miller Vocational Outreach Program. We file for nonprofit status immediately. It takes time to get fully approved by the IRS, but once the application is in, you're in a pending status that gives you legal cover. But Jack, here's the kicker. If it's a school, you need to be up to code. Not residential code. Educational code." "What does that mean?" "It means," Mike grinned, showing a piece of bacon stuck in his teeth, "you need handicap accessibility. You need fire exits. You need clearly marked danger zones. You need to make your garage look like a high school shop class exploded inside it." "Perfect," I said. "I know a guy." Enter Big Tony. Big Tony was a general contractor who I had hired once to fix a leak in my roof. He was 6'4", shaped like a vending machine, and hated HOAs almost as much as I did. I called him that afternoon. "Tony, I need you to come over. I have a job. It's unconventional." Tony arrived in a van that sounded like it was dying of emphysema. He walked into my garage, looked at the Mustang, looked at me, and crossed his arms. "You want me to do what?" "I want you to turn this garage into a compliant vocational classroom," I said. "I want safety stripes painted on the floor in bright yellow. I want a massive commercial fire extinguisher mounted right there, visible from the street. I want an eye wash station. And I want a sign, a big sign." Tony scratched his chin. "Jack, the HOA is going to nuke you from orbit. You can't put commercial signage up." "It's not commercial, Tony. It's educational. Check the bylaws." Tony looked at me. He looked at the bylaws. Then he started laughing. It was a deep, rumbling laugh that shook the tools on the wall. "You son of a bitch. You're really gonna do it. Can you start tomorrow? For this, I'll cancel my other jobs. This is gonna be art." The transformation began on Thursday. It was loud. It was aggressive. Tony didn't just paint lines. He used industrial road paint that smelled like chemical warfare. He installed a safety railing around the workbench that served no purpose other than to look official. He mounted a dry erase board that covered half the wall. But the pièce de résistance was the sign. I had ordered it from a rush print shop. It was 4 feet long, aluminum, and reflected the sun with blinding intensity. It read, "The Miller Vocational Outreach Program. Building Futures. one wrench at a time. Authorized personnel only. Safety goggles required. Tony was drilling the mounting bolts into the stucco above the garage door, permanently damaging the exterior finish, which I knew would give Mrs. Gable an aneurysm. When I heard the clicking, she was running, actually running. "Mr. Miller! Mr. Miller!" I stepped out of the garage, holding a clipboard I had bought just for this moment. I was wearing a high-visibility yellow vest. "Afternoon, Mrs. Gable," I shouted over the sound of Tony's impact drill. "Please stand back behind the yellow line. This is an active educational zone." She stopped at the edge of the driveway, her chest heaving. She looked at the sign. She looked at the yellow stripes. She looked at Tony, who gave her a little wave with a drill bit in his mouth. What is this?" she sputtered. "You cannot put signs up. You cannot paint the driveway. This is a residential home." "Actually," I said, flipping through my clipboard. "According to Article 12, Section C, Paragraph 4, community outreach programs are exempt from signage restrictions provided the signage pertains to safety and identification of the facility. We are currently preparing for our first semester." "Semester?" Her voice went up an octave. "What semester?" "The fall semester," I said calmly. "I'm opening a mechanics school for underprivileged youth. We're going to be teaching them how to rebuild engines, grind valves, and use air hammers. It's going to be very enriching." Her face went a color I had never seen on a human being. It was a mix of purple and gray. "You can't. This is a business." "Nonprofit," I corrected. 501c3, pending. No commerce involved. Just education. We're doing it for the kids, Patricia. Don't you care about the kids?" "I will call the police," she hissed. "I will call the city. I will have you arrested." "You do that," I smiled. "But make sure you tell them to bring safety glasses if they want to enter the perimeter. OSHA regulations are very strict." She turned and marched away, pulling her phone out before she even reached the sidewalk. "She's gonna kill you," Tony said, climbing down the ladder. "Let her try," I said, looking at the glorious, ugly, bright yellow sign. "I haven't even brought in the students yet." The next step was the hardest. I actually had to find the students. I drove down to the East Side Community Center, a brick building about 20 minutes away from the suburbs of Whispering Pines. I spoke to the director, a tired woman named Sarah, who looked like she hadn't slept in a decade. "Let me get this straight," Sarah said, looking at my flyer. "You have a garage, you have tools, and you want to take 3 or 4 of my toughest teenagers and teach them mechanics? For free?" "Yes," I said. "Why?" she asked, suspicious. "Are you a weirdo?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm a guy who is incredibly spiteful toward his homeowners association, and I need a legal shield. But also, I really know cars, and I think it would be cool." Sarah stared at me for a long moment. Then she cracked a smile. "Spite? I can work with spite. Spite gets things done. I have 3 boys who are 1 step away from juvie. They're good kids, but they're angry, and they like breaking things. If you can teach them how to fix things instead, you can have them." "Deal," I said. "They start Saturday," she said. "Good luck. You're gonna need it." I walked back to my truck, feeling a sudden pang of anxiety. I had built the stage. I had written the script. But now the actors were coming, and I had absolutely no idea how to be a teacher. And I knew Mrs. Gable wasn't done. She was just reloading. Saturday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The sun hadn't even fully crested the immaculate oak trees of Whispering Pines before I was up, pacing the length of my newly striped garage floor. I had arranged 3 folding chairs in a semicircle around the engine block. I had printed out syllabuses that were mostly just pictures of engine parts. I was terrified. At 8:45 a.m., a beat-up sedan rolled up to the curb. Sarah, the community center director, hopped out, followed by 3 teenagers who looked like they would rather be anywhere else on Earth. First was Leo. He was skinny, wearing a hoodie despite the heat, with hair that covered his eyes. He had the distinct air of someone who was smarter than everyone in the room, and bored by that fact. Next was Trey. The kid was 16 going on 30. He was massive, broad shoulders, silent, staring at the ground. He looked like he could lift the engine block without the hoist. Finally, there was Sam. Short, wiry, with restless energy, tapping on his phone screen like he was trying to break the glass. "Here they are," Sarah said, marching them up the driveway. "Gentlemen, this is Mr. Miller. He's going to teach you how not to end up in jail. Mr. Miller, if they steal anything, call me. If they break anything, well, it's a garage." "Thanks, Sarah," I said. I looked at the trio. "Sup." "Is this it?" Leo asked, looking around the garage. "You live in Stepford?" "Basically," I said. "Look, guys, here's the deal. I need this to look like a school so my neighbor doesn't sue me. You need somewhere to be that isn't the streets. If you listen to me, I will teach you how to take apart a V8 engine and put it back together. If you can do that, you can get a job anywhere. If you don't want to learn, you can sit in the chairs and look busy. But you have to wear the safety glasses." Trey looked at the Mustang on the stands. His eyes widened slightly. "Is that a 69? My eyebrows shot up. "Yeah, it is." "Fastback?" Trey asked, his voice a deep rumble. "Original 302 Windsor," I confirmed. Trey nodded respectfully. "Cool." "All right," I clapped my hands. "Grab a vest, grab glasses. Today we're learning about torque." The first hour was awkward. The second hour was messy. But by the third hour, something miraculous happened. We started using the air tools. If you have never heard a pneumatic impact wrench removing a rusted lug nut, let me describe it for you. It sounds like a machine gun arguing with a jackhammer. Zzz, dat, 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 dat. We were taking the suspension off the rear axle. I handed the impact gun to Sam. "Hold it tight," I warned. Sam squeezed the trigger. Brap! The nut flew off, hit the metal cabinet, and rang like a bell. Sam's face lit up with pure, unadulterated joy. "Dude, that thing is a beast!" "My turn," Leo said, dropping the board act. We were making noise, glorious, industrial, splitting noise. We were laughing. Music was blasting from my shop radio. For a moment, I forgot about the HOA. Then the shadow fell across the driveway. Mrs. Gable was back. And she wasn't alone. She had brought a man with her, a guy in a polo shirt holding a decibel meter. "Stop!" she shrieked. She had to scream to be heard over the air compressor. I signaled for Sam to cut the air. The silence that followed was ringing. "Class, pause!" I shouted. I walked to the edge of the yellow line. "Mrs. Gable, how nice of you to visit during lab hours." "This ends now," she was shaking. "This is intolerable. The noise level is beyond any residential limit. Mr. Stevens here has recorded levels in excess of 80 decibels. Mr. Stevens nodded. 82, actually. "And who are these people?" She gestured at the kids like they were stray raccoons. "You are running a flophouse for delinquents." Leo stepped forward. He pulled his safety goggles down around his neck. "Excuse me, ma'am. We are scholars." "Scholars?" she scoffed. "Yes," I interjected, stepping between her and the kids. I saw Trey's fists clench at his sides, and I knew I had to de-escalate this fast before it became a police matter for the wrong reasons. "These are the inaugural students of the Miller Vocational Outreach Program. And regarding the noise, Mrs. Gable, have you checked the municipal code regarding educational facilities?" "This is not a school," she yelled. I walked over to my workbench and picked up the binder Mike had prepared. It was 3 inches thick. I walked back and held it up. Federal Tax ID application, pending. Articles of incorporation. And here, I flipped to a tab, is the city ordinance regarding noise pollution. Exemptions apply to construction, emergency services, and licensed vocational training activities during the hours of 9 o'clock a.m. and 5 o'clock p.m. I tapped my watch. It is 11:30 a.m. We are vocational training. We are training the future workforce of America. Are you trying to impede the education of underprivileged youth based on your bias against blue-collar labor? I said it loud. I said it so the neighbor across the street, who was washing his car, could hear. Mrs. Gable's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked at the kids. The kids, bless them, formed a phalanx behind me. Trey crossed his massive arms. Sam spun the impact wrench on his finger, extremely unsafe, but looked cool. Leo just smirked. "You are twisting the law," she whispered. "I am following the law, Patricia. To the letter. Now, if you'll excuse us, we are in the middle of a lesson on suspension geometry. It's very complex. You wouldn't understand." I turned my back on her. "All right, class, let's get that sway bar off. Trey, you're up." Behind me, I heard the click-clack of retreat, but it was slower this time. Defeated? No. She was regrouping. But for today, we had won. "Who was that witch?" Sam asked, firing up the compressor. "That," I said, grinning, "is the reason you guys get free Gatorade. Now focus." By the end of the day, the kids were covered in grease. They looked tired, but they looked happy. "Hey, Mr. Miller," Leo said as they packed up. "This was not terrible." "Yeah," Trey said. "The Mustang is going to be sick." "Same time next week?" I asked. "Yeah," they said in unison. I watched them walk down the street to the bus stop. I felt a strange warmth in my chest. I had started this to annoy a woman in a cardigan, but looking at the disassembled rear end of my car and the fact that Trey had organized my wrench drawer by size without being asked, I realized I was in deep. I went inside to grab a beer. My phone rang. It was Mike. "Hey, how'd the first day of school go?" "Great," I said. "We learned about suspension, and we repelled the invasion." "Good," Mike said, "because you're going to need that morale. I just checked the HOA's lawyer filings online. They aren't just fining you anymore, Jack." "What are they doing?" "They called the city zoning board, the fire marshal, and the police. They're claiming you're running an illegal shop, and harboring fugitives. Monday is going to be a bloodbath." I took a long sip of beer. "Let them come, Mike. I've got a lesson plan." Monday morning arrived with the subtle grace of a kidney stone. I had called out of work, using a family emergency excuse that wasn't technically a lie, considering my family was currently a 1969 Mustang and 3 teenagers with attitude problems. Mike was right. Mrs. Gable hadn't been sleeping. She had been dialing. At 9:15 a.m., the first cruiser rolled up. It wasn't just a patrol car driving by. It was a black and white SUV that pulled directly into the apron of my driveway, blocking me in. The lights weren't on, but the presence was loud enough. I was in the garage, arranging wrenches by size, part of the curriculum, when I saw Mrs. Gable standing on her lawn, arms crossed, looking like a general surveying a battlefield she had already won. Beside her was a woman I didn't recognize. Probably another board member, clutching a string of pearls like they were rosary beads. I walked out to meet the officer. I made sure to put on my safety glasses first. The cop who stepped out was big. He looked like he ate other, smaller cops for breakfast. His name tag read Miller. No relation, thankfully. He hitched up his belt and adjusted his sunglasses, staring at my garage, then at me, then at the bright yellow school zone lines Tony had painted on the asphalt. "Sir," Officer Miller said. His voice was gravel. "Officer," I nodded. "Can I help you?" "We received a complaint," he said, pulling out a notepad. "Several, actually. Reports of an illegal chop shop operation, noise disturbances, and unlicensed commercial manufacturing involving minors." He looked up. "You want to tell me what's going on here?" "Absolutely," I said, projecting my voice so Gable could hear. "I am the director of the Miller Vocational Outreach Program. We are a non-profit educational initiative for at-risk youth." Officer Miller lowered his sunglasses. He looked at the garage. He looked at the Mustang on jack stands. He looked back at me. "A school?" "Yes, sir. We focus on automotive theory and practical application." "Uh-huh." He walked past me, heading straight for the garage. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. If he decided this was a business or a hazard or just stupid, he could shut me down. He walked into the garage and stood in the center of the bay. Just then, the side door opened. I hadn't expected the kids until 10 o'clock, but Sarah must have dropped them off early. Leo, Trey, and Sam walked in. And God bless them, they were already in character. Leo was wearing his safety vest zipped all the way up. Trey was holding a clipboard. Sam was carrying a box of donuts. "Good morning, Director Miller," Leo said, his voice deadpan. "We are ready for the safety briefing." Officer Miller turned to look at the three teenagers. He looked at Trey, who was 6'2", and looked like he could bench press the patrol car. "These are the students?" Miller asked. "Yes, sir," I said. "Leo, Trey, Sam, this is Officer Miller. He's here to inspect our safety protocols." Officer Miller walked over to the Mustang. He ran a hand along the quarter panel. He peered into the engine bay where the 302 Windsor sat, half assembled. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Mrs. Gable had crept closer to the edge of the property line, craning her neck to see the arrest. "Original block?" Miller asked quietly. I blinked. Yes. Numbers matching. We're doing a full rebuild, replacing the piston rings and main bearings." Miller nodded slowly. He leaned in closer. "You go with the flat tappet cam, or did you upgrade to a roller?" "Roller," I said, feeling the tension drain out of my shoulders like old oil. "Comp cams. Wanted better throttle response for the educational demonstration." Miller smirked. A genuine human smirk. "Nice. I've got a 72 Chevelle at home. Waiting on headers." He turned back to the kids. "You boys learning how to wrench on this?" "Yes, sir," Trey rumbled. "It's enriching." Miller laughed. He turned back to me. "Look, Mr. Miller, the lady across the street says you're running a chop shop. I see a restoration project and some kids staying out of trouble. Do you have a business license?" "I have a 501c3 application pending," I said, handing him the binder. "We are strictly nonprofit. No money changes hands, just knowledge." Miller flipped through the binder. He saw the terrifying amount of legal jargon Mike had stuffed in there. He closed it. "Technically," Miller said, scratching his chin, "you're clear on the criminal side. No stolen parts, no illegal transaction. As for the zoning," he glanced at Mrs. Gable, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. "That's a civil matter, not my jurisdiction." He walked back down the driveway. Mrs. Gable intercepted him. "Well?" she demanded. "Is he in handcuffs?" "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mr. Miller is conducting a restoration project. There is no evidence of criminal activity. Actually, it looks like a pretty solid program. Keeping kids off the street is a community service." "Community service?" she shrieked. "It's an eyesore! It's loud!" "If the noise exceeds the decibel limit after 10 o'clock p.m., call us," Miller said, getting into his SUV. "Otherwise, have a nice day." He rolled down his window as he backed out. "Hey, Miller," he shouted at me. "When you get that thing firing, let me know. I want to hear it." "Will do, officer," I saluted. Mrs. Gable stood on her lawn, watching the police car drive away. If looks could kill, I would have been vaporized on the spot. She spun around and marched back into her house. "Did we just win?" Sam asked, eating a donut. "That was round 1, I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Round 2 is going to be worse." Round 2 arrived 3 hours later in the form of a city code enforcement inspector. This guy wasn't cool. His name was Kevin, and he looked like he was born wearing a short-sleeved dress shirt and a clip-on tie. He didn't care about cars. He cared about codes. "I have a report of hazardous chemical storage and improper ventilation for a commercial facility," Kevin said, tapping a tablet. "Educational facility," I corrected. "And come right this way." I led him to the chemical safety station I had set up the night before. It was a metal shelf containing 1 bottle of Simple Green, 1 bottle of Dawn dish soap, 1 can of WD-40, a bucket of sand labeled Spill Containment. Kevin stared at it. "This is it?" "We run a green shop," I said solemnly. "Biodegradable solvents only." "What about ventilation?" he asked, looking at the ceiling. "If you're welding, you need extraction." "We don't weld," I lied. "We absolutely planned to weld, but not today. We focus on mechanical, assembly, bolt-on applications, physics." I pointed to the whiteboard where Leo had drawn a complex diagram. It was actually a diagram of a Star Wars TIE fighter engine, but unless Kevin was a nerd, it looked like advanced engineering. "Theory of combustion," I said. "We were just discussing the intake velocity." Kevin squinted at the whiteboard. He looked at the kids who were sitting in the folding chairs, looking studious. Trey was holding a torque wrench like a scepter. "I need to measure the square footage," Kevin said, "to ensure you aren't exceeding the occupancy load." "Go ahead," I said. He measured. He typed into his tablet. He frowned. "You're technically under the limit for a detached accessory structure used for assembly." "Educational assembly," I added. Kevin sighed. He looked like a man who wanted to find a violation but was thwarted by the sheer absurdity of the situation. "Look, Mr. Miller, the HOA is calling my supervisor every hour. They say you have industrial machinery." "I have an air compressor," I said. "You can buy it at Home Depot." "Okay," Kevin said. "I'm closing the ticket. No code violations observed. But between you and me, they're going to try the parking ordinance next." "Let them," I said. Kevin left. Mrs. Gable didn't come out this time. She watched from behind her blinds. I waved at the window. "All right," I said, turning to the troops. "We have survived the police and the city. Now we go on the offensive." "Offensive?" Leo asked. "Does that mean we get to use the hammers?" "Better," I said. "It means we're going on a field trip." I went to the back of the garage and pulled out a box I had ordered online. Inside were 4 handheld stop signs and 4 reflective sashes. "What is this?" Sam asked, holding up a sash with disgust. "This," I said, "is for our pedestrian safety module. The bylaws state that any educational facility must ensure the safety of its students during ingress and egress. We are going to practice safe street crossing." "You want us to walk across the street?" Trey asked. I want you to march, I said. Up and down the block, in front of Mrs. Gable's house, stopping at every driveway to check for oncoming traffic. Safety is paramount. The boys looked at each other. Then, slowly, wicked grins spread across their faces. They were teenagers. They understood the assignment. For the next hour, the Whispering Pines subdivision was treated to the spectacle of the Miller Vocational Outreach Program Safety Drill. Leo, Trey, and Sam marched in single file down the sidewalk. Every 10 feet, Leo would blow a whistle. I gave him the whistle. Big mistake or best mistake? Tweet! Stop! Leo screamed. The three of them would hold up their stop signs, look left, look right, look left again, and then march another 10 feet. Tweet! Check your blind spots, Sam yelled. They did this directly in front of Mrs. Gable's house for 20 minutes. I stood in my driveway with a clipboard shouting encouragement. Excellent form, gentlemen. Safety first. Watch out for the mailman. Mrs. Gable came out onto her porch. Stop that racket! Safety drill, ma'am, I shouted back. Federal regulations. I will sue you, she screamed. We're just walking, Leo yelled back, holding up his stop sign. Don't hit us. She went back inside and slammed the door so hard the wreath fell off. We marched back to the garage, victorious. The boys were laughing so hard Sam was wheezing. That, Trey said, wiping a tear from his eye, was the stupidest thing I have ever done. I loved it. You guys earned your keep today, I said. Pizza is on me. We sat on the garage floor, eating pepperoni pizza off the top of a toolbox. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a comfortable fatigue. Hey, Mr. Miller, Leo said, chewing a crust. For real, though, are we actually going to fix the car? Or is this just to mess with the old lady? I looked at the Mustang. I looked at the three of them. They had defended me against the cops. They had marched in safety sashes. We're going to fix it, I said. Next week we put the pistons in. By the end of the month, I want to hear this thing run. Bet, Leo said. I didn't know it then, but by the end of the month was optimistic, because Mrs. Gable was about to change tactics. She was done with the city. She was going for the wallet. The letter came on a Wednesday. No wax seal this time. Just a standard legal envelope from the HOA's management company. Violation notice. Offense: excessive vehicles, unauthorized parking, traffic congestion. Description: regular drop-off and pickup of non-residents creates traffic flow issues. Presence of multiple vehicles in driveway exceeds the single-family aesthetic. Fine. $250 per occurrence. She was fining me for the parents dropping the kids off. I stared at the letter. Sarah drove a beat-up Honda Odyssey. She dropped them off at 9:00 a.m. and picked them up at 3:00 p.m. That was it. 2 minutes of traffic twice a week. But the bylaws were vague enough. Excessive comings and goings inconsistent with residential use. I called Mike. Can they do this? I asked, pacing my kitchen. It's a stretch, Mike said, sounding tired. But they can argue that a school, even a home school, creates traffic liabilities. Jack, they're trying to bleed you. If you don't pay these fines, they can put a lien on the house. Eventually, they can foreclose. Foreclose? I stopped pacing. Over parking? HOAs have done it for less, Mike warned. You need to solve the traffic issue, or you need to make them regret bringing it up. I think you know which one I'm going to choose, I said. Jack, don't do anything illegal. I won't. I'm just going to expand the fleet. If the problem was parents dropping kids off, the solution was obvious. The school needed a bus, or more accurately, a dedicated training vehicle. I spent Thursday night on Craigslist. I wasn't looking for a good car. I was looking for a statement. I found it in a salvage yard 2 towns over. It was a 1998 Ford E350 box truck. It had been used by a plumbing company, then a band, and finally, apparently, by a colony of raccoons. It was white, with patches of gray primer and rust. It ran, but only if you asked it nicely. The price, $1,500. I bought it on Friday. I drove it home. It handled like a boat anchor and smelled like wet dog. But before I parked it in the driveway, I made a stop at the hardware store. I bought 5 gallons of safety orange exterior house paint and 3 paint rollers. Saturday morning, the kids arrived, dropped off down the street to avoid the fine. "What?" Leo asked, staring at the monstrosity parked in front of the garage. "Is that?" "Gentlemen," I said, "the HOA says your parents' cars are causing traffic. So I bought us a company car. But it doesn't look official enough. Grab an roller." "We're painting it?" Sam asked. "We are customizing it," I corrected. We spent the morning rolling bright traffic cone orange paint onto the sides of the truck. It was sloppy. It was textured. It was hideous. It was visible from space. When the orange was dry, I used black spray paint to stencil the text on the side. I wanted it big, Driver's ed and mechanics. Training student driver. Stay back 500 feet. And just for good measure, on the roll-up back door, honk if you love education. "It's beautiful," Trey said, stepping back. He had orange paint in his hair. "It's a war crime," Leo said. "I love it." We parked it in the driveway. It took up the entire space. It blocked the view of my house. It blocked the view of the garage. It was a giant orange middle finger to the concept of curb appeal. I waited. It took 20 minutes. Mrs. Gable didn't walk over this time. She drove. She pulled her Lexus up to the curb, rolled down the window, and stared. I was leaning against the grill of the truck, drinking a Gatorade. "Mr. Miller," she said. Her voice was trembling. "What is that?" "Corporate asset," I said. "For the school. We needed a vehicle to practice large vehicle maintenance. And since you complained about the parents' cars, I figured we'd just do a shuttle service." "You cannot park a commercial vehicle in a driveway," she screamed. "Article 6. I wagged a finger. Article 6 bans commercial vehicles. This is a non-profit educational vehicle, registered to the Miller Vocational Outreach Program. It's no different than a church van." "It's orange," she shrieked. It's fluorescent." "Safety first, Patricia," I said. "We want to make sure the children are seen." She gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought the leather would crack. "This isn't over. You think you're funny? You think this is a game? We are holding an emergency board meeting. We are going to foreclose on you, Mr. Miller. We are going to take your house, and we are going to tow this abomination to the scrap yard." She peeled out. The boys were standing behind the truck. The laughter was gone. "Can she do that?" Leo asked quietly. "Take your house?" I looked at the kids. They looked scared. Not for themselves, but for me. And maybe, for the first time, for the garage. This wasn't just a joke to them anymore either. It was their clubhouse. It was the only place where adults didn't yell at them, where they were learning that they were capable of building things. "She's gonna try," I said. I crushed the Gatorade bottle in my hand. "But we're not gonna let her." "How?" Sam asked. "We need to show the neighborhood what we're actually doing," I said. We need to finish the Mustang. The mood shifted. The prank war was over. This was a siege. We have 3 days before the monthly meeting, I said. The engine is in, but it's not plumbed. We need to run the fuel lines, install the radiator, wire the distributor, and bleed the brakes. That's a 2-week job, Trey said. He had been reading the manuals. We do it in 3 days, I said. We work late, we order pizza, we get this car running, and on Tuesday night at the town hall meeting, we don't just argue, we demonstrate. You want to drive the car to the meeting? Leo asked. I want to drive it into the meeting, I said, metaphorically, mostly. I want to show them that this isn't blight, it's excellence. The next 3 days were a blur. We worked. I came home from my HVAC job at 5:00 p.m., and the kids were already there, having walked from the bus stop. We worked until 10 p.m., stopping only because of the noise ordinance. Trey, it turned out, had hands steady enough to route fuel lines like a surgeon. Sam, the chaotic one, was a wizard with the wiring harness. He understood the flow of electricity better than I did. And Leo? Leo was the manager. He kept track of every bolt, every gasket. He read the torque specs aloud. Torque to 65 foot-pounds, Leo would say, reading the manual. Click. 65, Trey would confirm. It was professional. On Monday night, the night before the meeting, we were close. The car was fully assembled. The fluids were in. Moment of truth? I asked. I sat in the driver's seat. The interior still smelled like old vinyl and new hope. Trey and Sam stood by the fenders with fire extinguishers, just in case. Leo stood at the front, watching for leaks. I pumped the gas pedal twice. I turned the key. Nothing. Come on, I whispered. Don't do this to me. Pow. A backfire that sounded like a gunshot rang out. Mrs. Gable probably called the SWAT team. Timing is off, Sam yelled. Distributor is 180 degrees out. We spent the next 2 hours sweating, swearing, and re-stabbing the distributor. It was 9:55 p.m. We had 5 minutes before the noise curfew. One more try, I said. My hands were shaking. I turned the key. Vroom. It didn't just start, it roared. The 302 woke up with a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the concrete floor and straight into my bones. It settled into a choppy, aggressive idle. Chug, 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 chug. The boys were screaming, but I couldn't hear them over the engine. They were high-fiving. Trey was hugging Sam. Leo was pumping his fist in the air. I killed the engine before the clock struck 10 o'clock. The silence that followed was electric. We did that, Trey said, his voice full of wonder. We actually built that. Yes, we did, I said. I looked at them. They were covered in grease, sweat, and orange paint. They looked like mechanics. Tomorrow, I said, we go to war. But the war wasn't going to be fought with wrenches. It was going to be fought in the community center, and Mrs. Gable had one final weapon she hadn't revealed yet. When I checked my mail the next morning, there was a letter from the city zoning board. Notice of hearing petition to condemn property. Based on unsanitary conditions and attractive nuisance. She wasn't just trying to foreclose, she was trying to condemn the house. She claimed the junk cars and unsupervised minors created a biohazard. She was going for the kill shot. I looked at the orange truck. I looked at the beautiful gleaming Mustang. Okay, Patricia, I whispered. You want a show? Let's give you a show. I texted Mike, bring the suit, And bring the camera crew." Mike replied, "Camera crew?" I replied, "Trust me, it's graduation day.